Welcome into Survivor Analytics. I am your host, Clyde, and today I will be walking through my strategic summary for Episode 7 of the Traitors US Season 3. On the surface, this week's episode served as the conclusion of the Boston Rob storyline. The episode focused a lot on his downfall, which was not a major shock. After Episode 6, I was hoping for a dominant traitor game from Rob, similar to his run on Redemption Island, but that was never really in the cards for this season. Jumping right in, the episode opens with my favorite weekly segment of this season, the dysfunctional Traitors Meeting. Carolyn, Danielle, and Rob still want each other out of the game, and they can never agree on anything. In past episodes, there was this sense of hostility and anger amidst the traitors, but that has kind of simmered down, and now these turret meetings are just depressing. Danielle says that she no longer cares who the traitors murder. Meanwhile, Rob refuses to even reveal who acquired the shield in his group last week because he cannot trust either Danielle or Carolyn. As for the murder decision, we get 3 names thrown around, but none of them feel very serious because the traitors are so disordered. The episode goes as far as to emphasizing the possibility of the traitors not murdering anyone because they cannot reach a unanimous decision. We see Rob pitch Dylan's name, which is pretty ridiculous considering that Dylan fully trusts all 3 of the traitors, but especially Rob. Given the edit of this show, I don't know how serious Rob was with this idea, but I don't hate it from his perspective. Yes, cutting Dylan would cause Rob to lose one of his closest allies, but that move would potentially take some of the heat off him. The last 2 murders of Bob H. and Robin clearly benefited Rob's game more than anyone else in the castle. At this point in the season, Rob needed a cooldown that proved his innocence. The second name on the board is Sam. Sam is widely perceived as a faithful, and we rarely see him actively targeting anyone else in the game. A Sam murder feels like the safest move for the traitors right now. And then we get to Rob's biggest antagonist in Derek. Last week, Derek led the charge against Rob at the round table, so there was some concern for me that Rob would immediately gun for him. And for the 3rd consecutive episode, Rob gets his way in the turret and Derek goes home. This move ends up being the final nail in Rob's coffin, as it only adds to the evidence against him. Now, I'm not surprised that Rob went after Derek in this round. In fact, Derek correctly predicted his own murder in episode 6. This is just how Rob plays these social strategy games. He works to form a stable majority alliance, and he immediately leads the charge against those players who oppose his group. It's an aggressive playstyle that has been incredibly successful for Rob on Survivor, but I don't think that strategy translates well to a game like the Traitors. This is a game of subtlety and discretion, which aren't in Rob's DNA. He wants to play out in front. And maybe Rob thought that he could afford to cut Derek here because he had the numbers for the round table. To be honest, he was not completely misguided in that read. Rob maintained the trust of Sierra, Chriselle, Dolores, and Dylan. Including himself, Rob had 5 locked votes on his side, but he incorrectly believed that he could swing another person over. At the end of the day, it's still a bad move from Rob, probably his worst decision of the season. I don't understand this play from the perspective of Danielle either. Danielle admits in confessional that Derek is one of her closest friendships in the castle. On top of that, Derek doesn't suspect Danielle right now as a traitor. He is a great ally for her in this section of the game, yet she willingly gives him up. Maybe Danielle believed that a Derek murder would paint an even bigger target on Rob, but I don't know if a Rob blindside outweighs the loss of that ally. Moving on, this episode featured the most ridiculous mission of the season so far. Players participated in a game where they held hands as production dumped different insects on top of them. Pairs competed against each other, and whichever duo lasted longer would earn a shield, meaning half the cast is safe from the upcoming murder. I got the 6 shield recipients on this slide, but let's jump over to the vulnerable contestants. Carolyn is technically vulnerable, but that doesn't matter as she's sitting in the traitor's turret. Of these 5, I think that Gabby and Dylan are the safest next week. Gabby has positioned herself as one of Carolyn's closest allies, which we see during the mission. I expect Carolyn to campaign for her safety moving forward. Meanwhile, Dylan appears trusting of both of the remaining traitors, but I don't know how his game will change with the elimination of Boston Rob. There's a real case to cut any one of those other 3 players. Tom and Dolores have solidified their reputations as faithfuls, but neither one has proven to make great strategic reads. Tom especially is edited as this dodo character that's never taken seriously at the round table. According to postseason press, Tom was very scatterbrained in the castle, constantly coming up with new theories with no real foundation. I think that the traitors would benefit from keeping both Tom and Dolores around as strategic distractions. That takes us to Chriselle, who I consider the optimal murder for episode 8. By cutting Chriselle, Carolyn can ideally drive Gabby closer to her. That move could also potentially create a target on Tom, as he's beefed with Chriselle for the entire season. Leading up to the round table, there were not many names floating around the castle. The edit only highlights two competing ideas, which tells me that Rob was probably the consensus plan regardless of his antics before the vote. Rob makes a valiant effort to push the target onto Brittany. He claims that before Derek's murder, Derek pitched two names, those being himself and Brittany. I get what Rob is trying to do here. I think that voting out Brittany would be great for him, as it removes another gamer who is catching on to his schemes. The issue with this plan is that it hinges on the words of Derek. If people are bought into the theory that the traitors removed Derek from the game due to his correct reads, then it makes way more sense for the castle to vote out Rob. Derek may have mentioned Brittany's name, but he was clearly the lead voice against Rob. All of this is to say that I didn't really like this attempt from Rob. I think he would have been much better off trying to hide in the shadows, but I understand that he needed to step up once he learned that he was in danger. Everyone else in the game appears fully set on taking out Rob. We're at the point now where even Tom is convinced that Rob is a traitor. We get to the round table where 7 out of 12 players vote against Rob. There's a couple votes worth pointing out here. Both Danielle and Carolyn elect to flip on their fellow traitor. Great move by Danielle in knocking out someone who she could not trust in the turret. As for Carolyn, I still disagree with this move. I mentioned this last week, but I don't know what Boston Rob did exactly to lose Carolyn's trust. Yes, he was the first traitor to flip on his own in taking out Bob the drag queen, but that move benefited Carolyn's game. Prior to that vote, Danielle and Bob were primed to run the turret. Rob opened the door for Carolyn and offered her an alliance, but she felt that she could no longer trust him. All 4 of Rob's loyal allies in Sierra, Chriselle, Dolores, and Dylan abstained from voting against him, but they also don't support his move against Brittany. It feels like these players knew that Rob was going home, but they didn't want to participate in that plan in the event that he was a faithful. If they really wanted to keep Rob around, they would have come together against another player. Dylan's vote against Gabby is especially strange. As far as I know, Gabby's name was never in serious circulation, so this feels like a throwaway from Dylan. He actually made a similar move in the Nikki banishment in episode 5. So Rob is the second traitor banished this season. I've always been a Boston Rob fan, and I think that he gave us exactly what we expected on this show. From the moment Rob became a traitor, he looked to take control of the game. It feels like the past 4 episodes have been the Boston Rob show. He leads the murders of Robin, Bob H., and Derek. Then at the round table, Rob is a head strategic player in the banishments of Bob, Nikki, and Wes. The fact that Rob survived that Wes banishment is absolutely insane. There was so much going against Rob leading up to that round table, yet he still got his way. I see that round as his best strategic move of the entire season. All of that is great, but Rob still deserves a lot of blame for his own elimination. As I said earlier, I believe that he played too out in front, which is just textbook Boston Rob. To his credit, I think that Rob came into this season with an inherent disadvantage due to his involvement in the cage twist. There was a consensus belief in the castle that someone from that twist entered the game as a traitor, which not only put a target on Rob, but it impacted his potential alliances with Wes and Derek. Who knows how Rob performs on this season if he enters the game as a normal contestant, but I don't see him drastically changing his strategy either way. Looking forward, I am interested to see how the game works without Rob. Next week, we'll get to watch Danielle and Carolyn truly work together on a murder decision for the first time since the premiere. I'm also interested to see these shifting alliance dynamics in the castle. Through this point in the season, most of the alliances highlighted in the edit are those related to Boston Rob. So I'll miss Boston Rob on the Traitors, and I don't really know where we'll go from here. There's still a bunch of elite characters in the castle, like Carolyn, Gabby, Brittany, Danielle, and Tom, but there's also a bunch of people who haven't added much to the entertainment level of the show. I would have been okay with losing the likes of Ivor, Sierra, Sam, or Dolores before Boston Rob. I think that episode 8 will serve as an inflection point of the season. We'll know by next week if we're in line for a great or mediocre endgame. Here's a look at the strategic layout for next week. A lot has changed here with the losses of Derek and Rob. Danielle and Brittany went from enemies in the premiere to now #1 allies who are dancing and celebrating together after the Rob banishment. To me, this episode solidified the Carolyn-Gabby alliance as well as the Sam-Ivor alliance. As per usual, I have no clue where Sierra stands in the castle. She is the only person to work with Boston Rob in voting against Brittany, which could create some suspicion around her. We also need to remember that Sierra was widely perceived as a traitor earlier in the season due to her involvement in the coffin twist. If players return to that theory, I could see her going home next. We can finish up this video with my weekly tier list outlining every remaining contestant's chances of winning. Same 4 players in 0 chance. We got Tom, we got Ivor, we got Sierra, and we got Sam. I know this episode is edited as Tom's redemption. We see multiple contestants congratulating him for his work in the Rob vote. We also get a confessional from Tom talking about how now people will start to take him seriously. But if I'm honest, I still don't look at Tom as a legitimate contender. He doesn't seem to have a great read on the game, and I personally look at the Rob elimination more as a move by the ghost of Derek. As for the other 3, they're easily the most under-edited people on the entire cast. There were points in each episode where I genuinely forget that Sam and Ivor are even in the castle. Onto unlikely victories. I think that both Dolores and Chrishell are in serious danger for next week's murder. Between the 2 of them, I have a bit more confidence in Dolores long term. At least she has the storyline of losing all of the other housewives. Chrishell is only presented as a side character in other people's stories. She was the least visible player of the Bambi Alliance. She's shown advancing Rob's game last week by telling him that Wes was gunning for him. She has a rivalry with Tom, but we see much more from Tom's perspective. I also kept Danielle in this tier. I debated moving her up due to her alliance with Brittany and her achievement of finally taking out Boston Rob. The issue with Danielle, for me, remains her rivalry with Carolyn. It's clear at the end of the episode when the 2 of them meet in the turret that this Boston Rob boot does not mean that they will realign. Danielle tries her best to reconnect with Carolyn, but that trust is broken. Carolyn knows that when it comes down to it, Danielle will choose Brittany over her. The Carolyn-Danielle battle will happen at some point, and I'm expecting Carolyn to win it. I think she has a wider range of connections in the castle. It's just a matter of keeping her pawns in the game. Only one player in my high upside tier, and that's Brittany. Major week for Brittany as she defends herself at the round table and slays the dragon that was Boston Rob. She's locked with Danielle, who will likely campaign for her from the turret. And according to Outside the Game press, Brittany suspected Danielle as a traitor by this point in the season. I can totally see a world where Brittany uses Danielle to help her advance through the next couple rounds with the intention of flipping on her in the late game. For the first time this season, I got 3 players in my contenders tier. Carolyn and Dylan have been here since episode 1, but I think that Gabby has done enough on the show now to warrant a spot as a contender. She's kind of the narrator of the season. The camera always pans to the Gabby perspective. While this was a relatively quieter episode for Gabby, I feel that her cumulative edit is too strong to not put her up here. I still look at Dylan as the most likely faithful to win the show. Obviously, this week was a rougher look for him. He loses his closest ally in the game, the guy that theoretically would campaign for his safety in the turret. There's now a solid case against Dylan in that he was very loyal to one of the more obvious traitors. Maybe he was so loyal to Rob because he's a traitor himself. With all that said, Carolyn and Danielle have no intention of cutting him. He seems socially insulated in the castle, and he's still got the Bob move on his resume. But at number 1 overall, I'm sticking with Carolyn. Last episode, Carolyn voted against Danielle. We see the confrontation between the 2 of them in the turret, but we never see how the rest of the castle reacted to that vote. No one seems to distrust Carolyn after that weird decision. She's doing an incredible job of managing her threat level. I watched some of the additional post-game interviews from Peacock, and just about every player taken out of the game is most shocked to learn that Carolyn is a traitor. My only real concern with Carolyn long-term is her decision-making in the turret. Up until this point, Carolyn was a backseat passenger as other people led murder decisions. Bob and Danielle lead them in the early game, and then Boston Rob takes the reins. With Rob out of the game, Carolyn will have more agency now than she's held all season. I don't know what Carolyn will do with that new power. I don't have a lot of information on Carolyn operating from the top. In Survivor 44, she has one move in the pre-merge where she plays a key role in taking out Sarah, but outside that tribal council, Carolyn kind of follows the strategic plans of other people. So due to that lack of information, there is still reason for concern with Carolyn. I don't think she's a locked consensus number 1. So that's everything I got for this week. Come back next week, and I'll go through my strategic summary for episode 8.